Cool. So hello, I'm Rianne Jones and I've been working with the Suffolk Windrush Select Committee on a project to celebrate Windrush Day of 2021. I'm from Ipswich myself and I'm of mixed race, Jamaican and British heritage, third generation. My nan and granddad came over to the UK in the 50s during the Windrush, and it's so wonderful to be involved in a project to celebrate Windrush Day. And recently during university, I created a campaign called Home Wasn't Built on a Day, which was all about celebrating and educating the UK on the achievements and contributions of the Windrush generation as part of building our national story. And more on that can be found on my Twitter at Rianne_Jones or Instagram at Created by Rianne. Now, today, as part of our project, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our fantastic guest, David Lammy, who I'm sure needs no introduction. But David Lammy is the Labour Member of Parliament for Tottenham, where he was born and raised. After being elected for the 7th time, he was appointed Shadow Secretary of State for Justice. As part of this role, David built on his landmark review of the criminal justice system, which explored the treatment of and outcomes for Black and minority ethnic people in British courts and prisons. David also previously served as Culture Minister and Higher Education Minister under the Blair and Brown Labour governments. And it's really great to have David involved with us today in our project celebrating Windrush Day. And David himself is a second generation of Guyanese heritage. His parents arrived to the UK from Guyana during the 1970s as part of the Windrush generation. And on top of his political accolades, David is renowned for his role in pushing for justice for those victims of the Windrush scandal and also victims of London's Grenfell fire. Now, hi David, it's nice to meet you.
Hi, great to be with you.
And how are you doing today? How is
Well,
life?
I'm very well, but it's always busy for me, so well, but busy.
I can imagine. Thanks for fitting us in today. And as you know, lockdown has been really tough over the last year for everyone. And I wondered what have been some of the ways in which lockdown has affected members of the African and Caribbean community and the Windrush generation in the UK?
Oh, look, I think in many, many ways. I think the biggest place to start is very sadly the disproportionality that we see in the number of people who've died as a result of the pandemic in Black communities. And that means that there is actually a lot of grief around. It's hard to be Black in Britain and not know someone who has died, or someone who knows someone. And I certainly have an uncle who lost his life in New York. I have, and then in the wider community, I've got a classmate who sadly died age 45. And of course in Tottenham, there are many, many people that have passed away. So I think grief is the starting point.
Yeah.
I think worry is the next thing, and the worry comes in lots of different ways. It comes with children being out of school and placing pressure on families, parents worrying about how they educate their children at home and keep down a job, worried that, children disappearing into a world of Xbox and game consoles and social media and the inability to police that. Drifting into criminality and things, very sadly. The stresses and strains that the recession puts on families, because we have to be honest, by and large, African Caribbean communities in this country are not communities of wealth. There is still tremendous poverty across Black communities in the UK. So the context of this pandemic is very hard. And then, of course, we've got the vaccine hesitancy and sound historic reasons why Black communities are sceptical, suspicious of health services, suspicious of pharmaceutical companies. It's not always about, I'm never going to take the vaccine, but it is often about, I want to see a hell of a lot of others, white people, take the vaccine before I'm going to risk it on me. And so it's been a period of tremendous pressure, I think, for African Caribbean communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely agree. Especially with how you say everyone in the Black community knows someone that has been affected by COVID. And I know with my family, it took a great lot of convincing some family members to take up the vaccine. So yeah, completely
So
agree.
it's just stressful. It's just more stress on top of stress already, if you know what I mean.
Especially when,
And
like,
the other thing I would say about our communities is, we ought to think of the wider health service. We're also frontline workers, whether in the health service, public sector. All of that places us at risk in the coronavirus. And I think that the face of those who are dying were public sector workers, often throughout this crisis, at the beginning of this crisis. So yeah, it's stress upon stress upon stress is the truth.
Yeah. And I saw on Twitter recently you posted an LBC interview clip of a caller claiming that you can't be of African and Caribbean descent as well as being English. In your view, have Black people been accepted as full citizens of Britain?
I think that's a work in progress. I think that Black people are up on the whole for being British because of the empire, and so they're more comfortable saying I'm British, Black British, African Caribbean British. But what I was challenging in that interview was my right to be English, because actually I'm not Welsh, I'm not Scottish. On their census forms, you can put, Black Welsh, Black Scottish. You think about people like Shirley Bassey, as a Welsh woman who's Black in origin. Of course, you can put that down, but if on our census form, you cannot put that you are African Caribbean English. And the problem is, there is a growing movement in this country that Englishness is a sort of ethnic nationalism. It's an ethnic national identity, that you have to be Anglo-Saxon, Celt, and I think that's a problem. It means that you end up leaving Englishness to the National Front and the BNP and the EDL and others on the extreme. We have to claim it. We have to claim our heritage. And look, I know when I go back to the Caribbean, and I go back very regularly, I'm very proud of my Guyanese roots, and I've got family in Jamaica and Barbados, Antigua, right across the Caribbean. But I don't think they say, David, you're Caribbean when you land, I'm English. And so it's important to claim that. And I think it's a work in progress. I think there's still a lot to do in explaining to people why we are here, how we come to be here, and our story, which is not just, can't be confined just to Black History Month. British history, English history is Black history, is the point. And there's a lot more to do.
Definitely. I think back to at school, and we didn't cover any Black British history at all.
But you did, you see. I mean, this week you'll have seen that the commemoration of the First World War left out the African soldiers that contributed, and they were dumped in mass graves and didn't get a headstone. And my campaign for an apology and for righting that wrong, fortunately, has come to a head, and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission have addressed this issue and now going to address it. The truth is, when you say you didn't see it, it was there, but it was just hidden. It was just left off the page. We think of the First World War in terms of the Battle of the Somme and Wilfred Owen and poetry, and and we leave out the East Africa campaign. No one knows that the first shots were fired in Africa. We leave out the King's African Riflemen. We leave out the West Indian Regiment. And of course, it would have lifted my shoulders at school if I had learned about that. It would have lifted your shoulders. I'm afraid still to this day in schools, there are children, white and Black, not learning that history. And as a consequence, there's a sort of delusion about this country and its history, and about the contribution that we have made, not just since the Windrush, by the way. That's also a myth, but hundreds of years we have made a contribution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously this project is all about uplifting our community and celebrating the people of the Windrush generation. But of course, we must also acknowledge the massive injustices of the Windrush scandal. So what does the recent Windrush scandal mean to you?
Well, I called it a national day of shame in Parliament when that scandal broke. Mm-hmm. It's to say that there is an inextricable link between the people of the Caribbean and this country, and that will always be the case, because we arrived in the Caribbean as a result of being ripped from the continent of Africa. And in that process, we lost our language, we lost our culture, we lost our religion, we lost a fundamental part of one's identity. It was profound and huge. Mm-hmm. And the future generations grew up having to find their way as enslaved people, and built something. We got our freedom after a few hundred years, but it was not a freedom that it meant that we were compensated or given any wealth. We had to, again, build something new. My ancestors set up the village of Hopetown in Ghana. What an appropriate name for my ancestors who created something out of nothing. Mm-hmm. And that means that there's a fragility in our community, a fragility yet to be fully understood and acknowledged. And, when I'm very privileged to travel, and, when I go to places like New Zealand or Canada, where they talk about Indigenous communities, there is a respect and an understanding of the way in which Maori people were treated in New Zealand, the way in which Indigenous people were treated in Canada. And I don't think we're any different, but yet we have not had that reparation, that reconciliation to our understanding, and people's understanding of why we're where we are, as it were. Why are we an impoverished community? Well, because we have had, relatively little time to rebuild again. Yeah. There are traumas running through our people, yet we are here in tremendous numbers. Yet there is joy, there is laughter, there is carnival, there is celebration, there is fantastic food in our communities, and there is forgiveness. Because despite it all, for example, and you're a testimony to this, Rianne, like my own children, you're of mixed background, and the truth is Black people are falling in love with white people in huge numbers in this country, some of the biggest numbers in the world. And that is an indication of love and of overcoming the problems of the past. It's a shame that the government haven't caught up with us, but that is what is happening. So it's a complicated story. It's a story of pain and of hardship, but it's also a story of redemption and power and tremendous beauty as well. And that is how I sort of reckon with and handle, and why I'm so proud to be of African Caribbean background. But why I think it's important that we get to a place in this country where people really, really genuinely approach our community and community relations with a degree of humility and understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And as Black people in the UK, what do you think are the key issues that we currently experience, and what can we do to raise awareness of these issues and address?
Well, just back to your last question, picking up on that, of course, what Windrush revealed was a vulnerability. Many of our community did not have passports, couldn't afford really to travel, didn't need them, found themselves the victim of the state in so many ways, in a hostile environment where we were low-hanging fruit, denied everything we'd worked for, despite building the NHS, backs of our nurses, putting our back into the tube network here in London, the transport system across the country, treated in that way. And of course, the other themed in the Black community is a real issue with the criminal justice system. That's why I did a review into this and looked at all the issues that come out of that. They start, of course, with stop and search, but the pipeline into stop and search is our experience in the education system, tremendous scandals in the 1970s and 80s in terms of how the education system worked for Black children in this country. And there are still profound issues. Who gets excluded from school in disproportionate numbers? Who gets sent to the pupil referral unit in disproportionate numbers? Despite that, we've got more African Caribbean young people going to university and Russell Group universities than ever before in our history. But they're not getting firsts at the same proportion as their white counterparts. So it's a complicated picture, but clearly we've discussed health, and there are big health inequalities. Why are Black women more likely to have mortality in childbirth than their white counterparts? But despite those issues, obstacles, health, criminal justice, housing. Let's give you another fact. The majority of Black boys born in this country are born above the 4th floor, which means that we are living in the country's housing estates. And living in a housing estates brings other challenges with it. Let's face it. Where's the neighborhood policing gone? Why are Black boys carrying knives? Largely because they're scared. And then they get arrested. So it's a complicated picture, and there remain really, really big issues for us in terms of disproportionality in the issues that we face.
And I'd be interested to hear, how far do you think we've come in the challenges around identity and citizenship rights since the 1980s, say? Are the challenges the same?
The challenge is always morph and change, but I'm afraid the obstacle is the same. The obstacle is systemic racism. That obstacle has not changed. That obstacle is still there. It's still, as our friends in South Africa and the United States described their battles, they called it the struggle back in the day, and we're still in the struggle. And so the way I would put this is, if the 18th century and before was a battle for our freedom and to throw off the shackles of colonialism and enslavement, and then we got to the 19th century, we got that freedom, and we had to build from nothing. And then we got to the 20th century, and that was a fight for our rights. Our rights not to be segregated, our rights to basic education, employment. Then the 21st century, and we're still at the beginning of this century, Rianne, but you'll probably make a more distance than me because you're much younger than I am. We're really into a period of reparation and understanding. And that moment has not yet come, but I'm convinced it will come, because I'm heartened by our young people. And this is Black and white. I think young people, on the whole, do get this stuff. They do get race. They want to see change. It's the dinosaurs in charge. It's the Boris Johnsons and the Nigel Farages that hold us back, not the young people. So I am hopeful that we will get there, but we've got a bumpy period because of recession and pandemic and Brexit and other things that are really stirring up the mix and making it difficult. And, some of what we're seeing around the world in these areas is a sort of look at the United States, is a sort of holding on to something that they're losing because the demographics are changing. Black and minority communities are coming through in bigger numbers. And here, I think you see in elements of the Conservative Party, we're seeing a sort of desire to go back to empire, an empire that cannot be recreated. It should not be recreated. And it's a desire to sort of hold on to something with a small c conservatism, to deny things like systemic racism, which we saw in the Sewell report recently. So I'm hopeful because of our young people. I'm hopeful because of our tremendous resilience. We are the world's most resilient community. But the obstacles that we face remain the same, and they're the obstacle of systemic racism.
And you're obviously someone hugely accomplished and a great role model to my generation and younger generations looking to excel in their careers and learning. I wanted to know kind of, a lot about your accomplishments. It'd be great to hear some of the challenges that you've faced to get to where you are now as a second generation of Windrush.
Well, I would say, look, all across my life, I've been told I can't do things. There are a few firsts in my backstory. First Black Briton to go to Harvard Law School. I was one of the youngest MPs at the age of 26, 27. But let's be clear, all across my life, people have said you can't,
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I said I wanted to be a barrister and the careers teacher said that I should be a fireman. I wanted to be an MP and the whole system, the media said this ain't going to happen. And clearly there are, I sit here, Rianne, and I'm tired. I'm tired. I don't know if I'm going to make old bones because representing, like I try to, must in the end have its stresses, whether it's Windrush, Grenfell, fighting for recognition for African soldiers, Brexit. These things do, of course, take their toll, don't they? They must do, I suspect, unless God is really good, and I believe in God, so let's see. I remain of Christian faith, and that matters to me. It keeps me going. It fills my soul. I don't talk about it that much, but, for me, I couldn't do this without my faith. I couldn't do this without the Caribbean. I go back there very, very frequently. I take my kids back there. I've got a wonderful family, friends who've known me for a lot longer than I've been in the public eye. But you just have to read the posts underneath my Twitter posts and Facebook posts to understand, I'm afraid, the racism and the nastiness that's out there that I have to wade through. And it's wade through is a good way of putting it because it's pretty nasty.
Yeah. Do you ever take any kind of breaks from social media, things like that?
Well, look, there are some stereotypes about being a black man. There are stereotypes that you're thick, stereotypes that you're lazy, stereotypes that you're sort of a womanizer. And part of my social media strategy, I'm pretty prolific on social media strategy, is to counter that business of being lazy or thick. It's a great way for people to say, well, he can't be thick. He's working the whole damn time, right? So that's part of my strategy in our public life, and it also lifts the spirits of our community because they can look at my feeds and they hear someone expressing things as they are expressing it in the barbershop. A little bit more sanitized, but look, there has to be hope. There has to be hope, because if there is no hope, then people they riot. So I recognize that my feed is not just about me. It's about a representation in our democratic system that allows people to say, that's my guy, that's what he's saying, I'm glad he's there. And that's as it has to be. I find my soul food and I sometimes tweet it, in the food that my aunties send me, that my constituents send me to build me up, as it were. Whether that's jerk chicken from my Jamaican friends or Guyanese pepper pot from my family. And as I say, I go to the Caribbean as soon as we can get out of this flight nonsense that we've got and this inability for international travel. I will be in the Caribbean with my family, resting up on a beach somewhere and sucking in all that community has to offer. I go to the United States quite regularly. I have a lot of African-American friends, great people like Henry Louis Gates and Cornel West. These are great, great black thinkers who again give me fortitude and strength and power. So I am fortunate because I have some means to be able to do those things, to nourish my soul. And as I said, I also have my faith. So in the end, you know, a lot of what's said, I don't take personally because I believe in God. And, you know, God has set me on a path and others on a path. And, you know, people who tweet this nonsense who are racist, they don't really know me. So I don't take it personally because I have a faith. So that's how I nourish myself. And of course, I've got Spurs and my love of football and cinema and theatre as well.
Okay, I wanted to move the conversation on to the success of your recent book, Tribes. Congratulations on that. And I hear that you're soon to publish the sequel, Out of the Atomized and Divided Culture. I wondered, how is this going and what impact do you hope this book will have on the nation?
Well, I'm very excited by my book, Tribes, and I'm glad that people are buying it and it's doing so well. And if you want to understand, I think, a little bit more about me, and you want to understand about what we're confronting in our politics, this new tribalism, then buy the book. It's easy to get, and I hope it's informs you. I put a lot of effort into it. You know, my writing is very much therapy. It's another way in which I work through not just the issues confronting me, but the issues confronting our politics and our country as a sort of almost a means of therapy. Actually, my next book isn't quite that title. You know, books change a bit as they're in development, but I have begun working on my next book. And it's a return to this business about the justice system and how it affects our community. But it's not going to be published for a few years because, you know, I'm a busy guy. So my books tend to take 3 or 4 years to complete, to be honest. So it won't be in the shops for a while. And we may have an election or something in that meantime, which pushes it back even further. But I'm very, very excited about the subject matter, learning lots, you know, about the subject matter, because it's also an opportunity to learn when you're writing and read and to try and bring things that are in academic circles into the mainstream in a mainstream way. That's the opportunity that my writing gives us.
Lovely. I'm looking forward to reading Tribes. It's on my list at the moment. Getting through Natives at the moment by Mikala.
There's a chapter in Tribes that I'm very proud of. It's all about the African Caribbean community. It's all about growing up in Tottenham. It's about the sacrifice of people like my mother. It's about where we've arrived at, Windrush, knife crime. I'm very, very proud of that chapter. There's another chapter on identity politics, Grenfell, the white savior thing, you know, comic relief, and the challenge that I made to comic relief a few years ago because black people were switching off in droves. Can't stand those images. You know, where are the positive images of Africa in our society? So I think that's a chapter that people will like. Yeah, there's quite a lot in Tribes that's about soul food, and for black people particularly, I think that will draw the people that will get a lot from.
Nice. And as a closing question, I'd be interested to know if you have any advice or words of encouragement to the younger generations of listeners, and what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, I would say your reach should outstretch your grasp. That, you know, be prepared to be told you can't do something. You've got to prove people wrong, and attend to your resilience. We are a resilient people. You know, we are resilient people, but you have to attend to that. You have to work on you know, what makes you able to face the storms in a system that still has systemic racism within it, in the workplace, you know, when your kids are going to school, all these things that are wearing. I've talked about some of the things that help me, but everyone's different. Allyship is important. I'm not a believer in a sort of black nationalism, that sort of is all about blackness and not about whiteness, if you see what I mean. We're 4% of the population. And therefore, in this country, this ain't the United States, in this country, it is about allies who do not look like you. Let me just be absolutely clear about it. Many of my mentors over the years have not been black, they've been white. In the workplace, in law, in politics. I ally myself in politics. I ally myself with women. I ally myself with LGBTQ communities to grow the numbers, if you like, from that 4% to grow it to a much bigger number so that you can engage in the battle. So I think allyship is really important as well. Don't disappear into a kind of weary, woe is me. It's all well, that ain't going to help anybody. And remember, it's a struggle. As I said, it's a struggle. And as my mother would have said, and I think this is the most important thing to remember, my mother used to say to me when I was downcast, low, depressed, live up to your ancestors' prayers. However hard you're finding it, it ain't as hard as your ancestors. Live up to their prayers. They prayed that you would be here, that you would be persevering, that you would acquire economic strength, that you would overcome, and that you would better yourself, the life of your children and grandchildren. Live up to their prayers. That's why, as my mother would say, don't bother come tell me you're gonna pick up a knife, because that ain't the way forward. Or selling drugs, that ain't the way forward. We are better than that.
That was great. Thank you, David. That brings our conversation to a close. Thanks so much for taking the time out to chat to us.
Not at all. Thank you for your wonderful questions, and bless you and bless the West Indian and African Caribbean community in Suffolk and in Ipswich. I have family in Ipswich, so I'm thinking of them as I am speaking to you. I won't name check them because they might not value me doing that, but I've got wonderful, wonderful African Caribbean and West Indian family in Ipswich, and my love to them if they see this.
Thanks a lot, David.
Great. Okay. All good?
Yes, all good.
Wonderful. I'm going to go so I can go back to the rest of the day. All right.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Take care.
Good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Rihanna?
Yes.